I should probably thank Martha for harassing me. If it wasn't for her obsession with my houseboat, I never would have discovered she'd been stealing money from the entire neighborhood. 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 police boats surrounding my perfectly legal floating home while Martha Hendricks, dressed in tennis whites like she's heading to the country club, stands on her dock pointing at me like I'm some kind of water pirate. Her voice cuts through the morning mist via bullhorn. "That floating trailer is destroying our property values." Here's what really gets me. This woman spent 3 years terrorizing neighbors over lawn ornament violations and dock color schemes, all while systematically embezzling $127,000, 0 cents, from the very community she claimed to protect. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. But Martha made one critical mistake. She assumed the divorced guy living on a houseboat would be easy to intimidate. What she didn't know was that I had time, tech skills, and absolutely nothing left to lose. What would you do if your HOA tried to ban you from your own lake? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up living on a houseboat in the first place. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm 45, and 6 months ago my world got turned upside down. 20-year marriage ended in a divorce that left me with half my savings and a serious need for a fresh start. But sometimes life throws you exactly what you need when you need it most. My grandfather's old A-frame cabin on Lake Serenity had been sitting empty since he passed 2 years earlier. I'd inherited it, but never had time to deal with the place between work and trying to save my marriage. When everything fell apart, that little cabin started looking like salvation. Problem was, the place needed serious work. New roof, updated electrical, foundation issues. We're talking months of renovation. That's where the houseboat comes in. See, I'm a software developer, but I've always been handy. Weekends I built custom furniture, restored old cars. So I figured, why not build myself a floating home while I renovated the cabin? The smell of fresh sawdust mixing with coffee beans in the morning air became my new normal. And let me tell you, waking up to the sound of loons calling across still water beats traffic noise any day. Lake Serenity's a decent-sized community, about 200 homes scattered around the shoreline. You've got your mix of folks, year-round residents who've been here for decades, weekend warriors with their bass boats, and newer retirees who moved up from the city looking for peace and quiet. Most people get along fine. Most people. Then there's the Pineview Shores HOA. They control about 60% of the lakefront properties, including some of the priciest real estate. That's where Martha Hendricks rules her little kingdom. Martha moved here 3 years ago after retiring from some bank management position in the city. Picture your stereotypical HOA president, blonde hair that never moves, perfectly manicured nails, and the kind of smile that never reaches her eyes. She lives in the biggest house on the lake with her husband Roger, who's about as exciting as watching paint dry on a humid day. Here's the thing about Martha, she's got a pattern. In her 3 years as HOA president, she's systematically targeted anyone who doesn't fit her vision of lakefront living. The Martinez family got harassment letters because their dock decorations were too colorful. Old Mr. Peterson faced daily complaints about his unkempt yard, even though the man's 83 and doing his best. The gravel crunching under your feet on the community boat launch, Martha tried to get that paved because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. My first week on the water, she shows up at my dock with her clipboard and that fake smile. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sure you understand that your little boat project here creates some concerns about precedent and community standards." I explained that my grandfather's property predates any HOA jurisdiction, that everything I'd built was completely legal under county maritime codes. Her smile got a little tighter. "Well, we'll just have to see about that, won't we?" That's when the harassment started. Daily photo sessions of my boat from different angles. Noise complaints filed every time I ran my generator, which was solar-powered and silent 90% of the time. She'd show up at community meetings talking about certain individuals who were disrupting the peaceful lake lifestyle we all cherish. The weathered cedar planks of my grandfather's old dock felt solid under my bare feet as I watched her drive away that first day. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Martha had that look in her eyes. The look of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. What I didn't know yet was that her obsession with my houseboat was about to uncover something much bigger than petty HOA power games, but we'll get to that. 2 weeks into Martha's photo surveillance campaign, she decided to escalate. I'm out on the water one morning testing some solar panel adjustments when I hear the distinctive whine of multiple boat engines approaching fast. Coast Guard cutter, County Sheriff's Marine unit, and Martha following behind in her pristine pontoon boat like she's leading some kind of naval parade. The Coast Guard lieutenant, young guy, probably mid-20s, pulls alongside with that serious expression they teach them at the academy. "Sir, we've received reports that your vessel may be operating in violation of maritime safety regulations." I invited them aboard for a full inspection. Here's where Martha's plan backfired spectacularly. See, when you build something yourself, you tend to go overboard on safety features. My little floating home had redundant bilge pumps, professional-grade electrical systems, Coast Guard-approved navigation lights, fire suppression, the works. 20 minutes later, the lieutenant's shaking my hand. "Mr. Morrison, this is some of the finest craftsmanship I've seen in 15 years of inspections. Mind if I ask who did the electrical work?" "That would be me," I said, watching Martha's face turn 3 shades of red from her pontoon boat. "Software development pays well, but I've always been handy." The metallic taste of morning lake mist hung in the air as Martha sputtered something about community standards and precedent setting. The Coast Guard officer just looked at her with that patient expression you use with difficult children. But here's the mini twist that changed everything. While the officer was writing up his glowing report, he mentioned that they'd received several complaints about my boat over the past month. Not just from Martha. Someone had been filing reports under different names. That's when I realized this wasn't just about HOA power games. This was harassment, and it was documented. That afternoon, I filed my own report with the county clerk's office. Turns out, there's this beautiful thing called selective enforcement that can completely void HOA covenant restrictions. When an HOA targets specific residents while ignoring identical violations from their preferred members, they lose their legal authority to enforce any restrictions at all. I started documenting everything. Timestamp photos, audio recordings where legal, written summaries of every interaction. My software background came in handy. I created a database that would make a detective jealous. Date, time, witnesses, exact quotes, cross-references to HOA bylaws. Word travels fast in a small lake community. Within a week, I had 3 different neighbors quietly approaching me with their own Martha stories. Turns out, her harassment campaign wasn't limited to my boat. She'd been systematically targeting anyone who didn't fit her suburban paradise vision. Mrs. Chen from the East Shore. She reported my grandson's kayak as an unlicensed watercraft last summer. Filed noise complaints every time I started my fishing boat before 7 a.m. Been launching at dawn for 30 years. The Martinez family, she tried to ban our family reunions because we had too many cars in our driveway. Each story added another piece to a pattern of selective enforcement that would make any civil rights lawyer salivate. But Martha wasn't done escalating. 2 days after the Coast Guard inspection, she called an emergency HOA meeting. I showed up, naturally. Community center was packed, maybe 60 people in folding chairs that squeaked every time someone shifted position. Martha stood at the front with a presentation that would have made corporate America proud. Charts, graphs, property value projections, the whole 9 yards. "Fellow residents," she began, voice dripping with false concern, "we face a precedent that could fundamentally alter our community's character. If we allow non-traditional watercraft to proliferate, what's next? Floating parties? Commercial enterprises? Floating? And," here she paused dramatically, "trailer parks?" The crowd murmured. Some nodded along, worried about their property investments, but others looked uncomfortable with her obvious targeting. Roger sat in the back row, looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. When it came time for questions, I stood up, stayed calm, kept my voice level, and asked one simple question. "Martha, could you please explain why my legally built, Coast Guard-approved houseboat violates community standards, but the Henderson's pontoon boat dock, which extends 15 feet past the legal setback line, doesn't warrant any HOA attention?" Dead silence. Martha's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She hadn't expected me to do my homework. Knowledge nugget. Document every interaction with your HOA. Selective enforcement is their legal Achilles heel. That night, driving home past the lake, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about my right to live on my boat anymore. This was about standing up to the kind of petty tyrant who ruins communities one harassment campaign at a time. Martha's response to public embarrassment was predictable. Double down and escalate. 3 days after the community meeting, I found a certified letter in my mailbox announcing an emergency HOA vote on new watercraft restrictions. The timing was suspicious. 30 days notice for a vote that would ban all non-traditional watercraft from HOA-controlled properties. Here's where Martha made her second strategic mistake. She assumed everyone would fall in line with her property values over everything approach. What she didn't count on was the old-timers, who'd been living on this lake since before HOA stood for anything more than a few neighbors agreeing to keep their docks maintained. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something Martha had never bothered with, actually talking to people. Not campaign speeches or presentations, just conversations over coffee, chance encounters at the boat launch, friendly chats while people worked on their docks. Bob Peterson, the 83-year-old widower Martha had been harassing about his yard, turned out to be a retired electrician who'd wired half the original cabins around the lake. "Son," he told me while we watched his granddaughter catch bluegill off his dock, "I've got 3 fishing boats, 2 jet skis, and a pontoon boat. According to Martha's new rules, I'd have to get rid of everything except the pontoon. Been fishing this lake for 40 years. Ain't starting now." The Martinez family had similar concerns. Their extended family gatherings included kayaks, canoes, and a couple of fishing boats that technically didn't meet Martha's traditional watercraft definition. Mrs. Martinez put it perfectly. "We came here to enjoy the lake with our children and grandchildren." When did that become controversial? But here's the mini twist that really changed the game. While I was building grassroots opposition to Martha's vote, I decided to do some research into HOA finances. My divorce had taught me that when someone's being irrationally aggressive about money matters, there's usually a reason. The HOA bylaws required financial transparency, so I requested copies of the last 3 years' budgets and expenses. What I found made me understand why Martha was so desperate to maintain control. The numbers didn't add up. Lake beautification, $40,000, 0 cents over 2 years. But I'd driven around the entire lake. What? Beautification. Community dock maintenance, $25,000, 0 cents annually. I'd seen those docks. They looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Administrative consulting fees, $18,000, 0 cents to something called Lakefront Property Management Solutions. A quick Google search revealed that Lakefront Property Management Solutions was owned by Martha's brother-in-law. Knowledge nugget. Most HOA boards violate financial transparency laws. A simple audit request can expose years of mismanagement. The night of the vote, the community center was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor as people squeezed in, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with nervous energy filled the air. Martha had prepared another presentation, complete with before and after photos of other lakes that had maintained their standards. But when it came time to vote, something beautiful happened. Bob Peterson stood up with his walker and addressed the room. "I've been living on this lake since 1987. Back then we helped each other with dock repairs and shared fish stories over beer. Now we're voting on whether my fishing boat fits someone's idea of traditional? This isn't about property values, folks. This is about whether we're still neighbors or just taxpayers in somebody else's kingdom." The vote failed, 47-23. Martha's face went through a color spectrum I didn't know was humanly possible. But losing the vote wasn't the end of Martha's escalation. It was just the beginning of her desperation phase. Within a week, she'd hired a lawyer. Not some local attorney who understood lake community dynamics, but an expensive firm from the city with partners who charged $400, 0 cents an hour to write threatening letters. The letter arrived on expensive letterhead full of legal terminology designed to intimidate. Basically, they were threatening to sue me personally for creating a public nuisance and interfering with HOA governance. They wanted my boat gone within 30 days or face legal action. I read the letter twice, then did something that probably wasn't my smartest move but felt incredibly satisfying. I laughed, out loud, sitting on my deck with morning coffee, watching a great blue heron fish in the shallows. I actually laughed at their legal threats. See, threatening to sue someone who's been through a contentious divorce is like threatening to diet someone who's already lost 50 pounds. I'd been through legal hell and survived. This was just Tuesday. But Martha's lawyer had made the same mistake she kept making. They assumed I hadn't done my homework. While they were researching ways to attack my boat, I'd been documenting every code violation, every selective enforcement incident, every financial irregularity I could find. And I was about to find something that would change this whole game. Martha's expensive lawyers spent 3 weeks researching every possible angle to attack my houseboat. County codes, state maritime laws, federal waterway regulations, they turned over every legal rock looking for something, anything, to use against me. What they found instead was the kind of irony that makes you believe in cosmic justice. My boat was not only completely legal, it was better built and more compliant than half the structures around the lake. But their research had an unexpected side effect. When you hire lawyers to dig deep into property regulations, sometimes they find things you didn't want them to find. Like the fact that Martha's own dock violated county setback requirements by 12 feet. The mini twist hit me like a lightning bolt when her lawyer's research report landed in my mailbox. See, they'd been trying to prove my boat violated waterway regulations, so they'd ordered a comprehensive survey of the entire lake. Professional surveyors, satellite imagery, the works. And right there on page 37 was a detailed analysis showing that Martha's pristine dock, the one she stood on while calling the cops on me, extended illegally into public waterway. Not only that, but the county had been trying to address waterway encroachments for 2 years as part of an environmental protection initiative. Martha's dock was literally on their enforcement list. That same week brought even better news. The HOA board elections were coming up, and thanks to Martha's heavy-handed tactics, I had more support than I'd expected. Bob Peterson nominated me himself. Jake's the first person in years to stand up to the bullying around here. Maybe it's time we had someone on the board who actually reads the bylaws. Election night at the community center felt like a block party. People brought homemade cookies and coffee that didn't taste like it was brewed in a gym sock. The smell of fresh banana bread competed with nervous energy as votes were tallied. When they announced the results, Jake Morrison, 78% of the vote, the applause lasted so long I thought my ears would ring. Martha sat in the front row looking like someone had just told her Christmas was canceled. Roger, bless his heart, actually walked over and shook my hand afterward. "Jake, you've got your work cut out for you," he whispered. "Good luck." My first act as a board member was to call for a forensic audit of HOA finances. Not because I suspected anything major. Honestly, I figured we'd find some sloppy bookkeeping and maybe a few questionable purchases. What I didn't expect was to uncover the kind of financial irregularities that would make a federal prosecutor interested. The forensic accountant I hired, Sarah Chen, who'd helped me navigate my divorce finances, started finding problems immediately. Contracts awarded without proper bidding, services paid for but never performed, expense receipts that didn't match bank records. But the real smoking gun was hiding in plain sight. Those administrative consulting fees I'd noticed earlier, $18,000, 0 cents annually to Martha's brother-in-law's company for property management consulting. But when Sarah dug deeper, she found invoices for services like lake water quality testing and community space optimization consulting. Fancy words for services that were never actually provided. Knowledge nugget: when an HOA threatens legal action, demand they prove their own compliance first. Bullies rarely follow their own rules. The preliminary audit findings were damning enough that I had to make a decision: keep this quiet and let Martha resign gracefully, or push for full accountability. The old me, the guy who'd spent 20 years avoiding conflict to keep peace in his marriage, might have chosen the easy path. But this wasn't just about me anymore. Mrs. Martinez deserved better than years of harassment over her family gatherings. Bob Peterson deserved to fish his lake without harassment complaints. The dozens of other residents who'd been quietly intimidated by Martha's reign deserved to know their HOA fees had been systematically misused. Besides, Martha had made this personal when she tried to destroy something I'd built with my own hands. The satisfaction of perfectly fitted joints and waterproof seals that came from creating something beautiful wasn't just about carpentry, it was about rebuilding my life after everything fell apart. Martha's response to losing the election was predictable. escalate again. She started showing up at my dock uninvited, demanding to see proof that my audit was legitimate. She filed complaints with the county about my harassment of HOA board members. She even tried to organize a petition to overturn the election results. The final straw came when she hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my personal life. Apparently, she thought my divorce proceedings would provide ammunition for her unstable neighbor narrative. What she found instead was a paper trail showing that I'd been the one pushing for mediation, while my ex-wife's lawyers demanded adversarial proceedings. Even my ex-wife called to warn me about the PI. Jake, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but some sleazy guy came around asking questions about our marriage. I told him you were the most honest man I'd ever met and that our divorce had nothing to do with your character. That conversation reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place, and why sometimes good people just aren't meant to stay married. Martha was about to learn what happens when you corner someone who's already lost everything that mattered to him personally and found something worth fighting for professionally. 3 months into the forensic audit, Sarah Chen called me with news that changed everything. I was sitting on my deck watching morning mist rise off the water when my phone rang with that tone that means serious business. "Jake, you need to sit down for this," Sarah said. "I've found evidence of systematic embezzlement totaling $127,000 over 3 years. The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the deck planks. "Come again?" Martha didn't just pad contracts or approve questionable expenses. She set up an elaborate scheme using shell companies, fake invoices, and diverted payments. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is organized theft. The details were staggering. Those lake beautification projects? The money went to companies that existed only on paper. The administrative consulting fees? Payments to Martha's relatives for services never rendered, equipment purchases that were never delivered, maintenance contracts for work that was never performed. But the masterstroke was her emergency fund management system. Martha had convinced the previous board to authorize her to move HOA funds into higher yield investment accounts during financial emergencies. What she'd actually done was transfer money into accounts she controlled, then use forged documentation to show the funds were still earning interest for the HOA. "Jake, she used the Postal Service to mail fraudulent financial statements to board members," Sarah explained. "That makes this federal mail fraud. We're not talking about HOA violations anymore. We're talking about felony charges." The legal implications hit me like a cold wave. Embezzlement from an HOA isn't just civil liability. It's criminal fraud. The insurance policy that covered HOA losses required criminal prosecution to trigger coverage. And Martha's house, purchased during the period when the embezzlement was occurring, could be subject to federal asset seizure. Knowledge nugget. HOA embezzlement is a federal crime if postal mail is involved and insurance claims require criminal prosecution. But here's what really got my attention. Sarah had discovered that Martha hadn't been working alone. The property management company that provided oversight services had been complicit through willful negligence. They'd rubber-stamped financial reports without proper verification, approved contracts without competitive bidding, and failed to maintain proper documentation. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I found similar patterns at 7 other HOAs where Martha provided consulting services over the past 5 years. This isn't her first rodeo." The scope was breathtaking. Martha had been running a systematic operation targeting small HOAs with insufficient financial oversight. She'd perfected a system of installing herself or allies in leadership positions, then systematically draining community funds through a network of shell companies and fake contractors. My little houseboat dispute had accidentally exposed a multi-communal fraud operation. That evening, I faced a choice that would define everything that came next. Sarah had prepared a comprehensive evidence package. The district attorney's office had confirmed they were interested in prosecution. The FBI's white-collar crime unit was reviewing the case for federal charges. I could have accepted Martha's panic offer to resolve this privately. She'd called that afternoon, voice shaking, offering to repay the stolen funds and resign quietly if I agreed to drop the investigation. Part of me, the part that just wanted to live peacefully on my boat and renovate my grandfather's cabin, was tempted. But sitting on my deck that night, watching stars reflect off the water my grandfather had fished for 60 years, I realized this was bigger than personal peace. Mrs. Martinez and her family deserved better than being harassed by a criminal. Bob Peterson deserved to know his HOA fees hadn't been stolen. The dozens of other community members who'd been quietly intimidated deserved justice. Besides, Martha had made this choice when she decided that calling the cops on my legal houseboat was preferable to running an honest HOA. She'd escalated at every opportunity, hired expensive lawyers to intimidate me, and tried to destroy my reputation through private investigators. Now she was about to learn that sometimes the person you're bullying knows how to fight back. The next morning, I called Sarah and told her to proceed with criminal charges. Martha's war against my houseboat was about to become a federal case. Building a case against someone who's been systematically stealing from a community requires more than just evidence. It requires a team. Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled what Sarah jokingly called the Lake Serenity Avengers. Sarah Chen, my forensic accountant, became our financial detective. Turned out, she had her own Martha story. Her previous HOA president had tried to ban her teenage son's car from their driveway because it was too old and unsightly. "I hate bullies," she told me over coffee at the local diner, "and I'm really good at following money trails." Mike Rodriguez, a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, joined our team after hearing about the case through professional networks. He'd been representing HOA harassment victims for 15 years and was genuinely excited about a case with criminal implications. "Most of the time we're fighting over paint colors and parking spaces," he explained. "This is actual justice." The county prosecutor, Patricia Williams, had built her career on white-collar crime. When Sarah presented our evidence package, Patricia's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "We've been looking for a case like this to demonstrate that HOA corruption has real consequences. Your Martha just became our poster child." But the real strength of our team came from the community members who'd been quietly documenting Martha's harassment for years. Bob Peterson had kept meticulous records of every noise complaint, every threatening letter, every attempt to intimidate him into compliance. Mrs. Martinez had photos of the citations Martha had placed on cars during their family gatherings. Tom Wilson, a local contractor, had documentation showing how Martha's brother-in-law had underbid his legitimate companies by impossible margins. Our strategy was three-pronged: legal, financial, and community-based. Mike would handle the criminal prosecution support and civil asset recovery. Sarah would continue following the money trail and coordinating with federal investigators. I would document the harassment patterns and organize community impact statements. The legal process moved faster than I'd expected. Federal embezzlement charges were filed within 2 weeks. Asset seizure warrants were prepared for Martha's house, cars, and bank accounts. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation into the multi-HOA fraud operation. Knowledge nugget: fighting HOA corruption requires a team approach. Forensic accountants, lawyers, and documentation specialists working together. But we knew Martha wouldn't go quietly. Patricia warned us that cornered white-collar criminals often make desperate moves. She's going to try to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or create enough chaos to muddy the waters. We need to be ready for anything. The community preparation was equally important. We organized weekly meetings at the community center, helping harassment victims document their experiences and prepare impact statements. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade cookies couldn't quite mask the nervous energy as people shared stories they'd kept quiet for years. Linda Morrison, no relation despite the name, had been keeping detailed records of Martha's selective enforcement. She cited me for having excessive lawn ornaments when I put up a bird feeder. Meanwhile, the Hendersons have a full garden gnome village, and she's never said a word. Each story revealed the same pattern. Martha targeted anyone who didn't fit her vision of lakefront living, while giving free passes to her allies. The documentation was overwhelming and would be devastating in court. Meanwhile, my software development skills proved invaluable for organizing evidence. I created a comprehensive database linking financial irregularities to specific harassment incidents, showing how Martha used manufactured conflicts to distract from her theft. Color-coded spreadsheets tracked money flows, timeline correlations, and witness statements. The technical work was oddly satisfying, like debugging code, but with real-world consequences. Every cross-segment that revealed another pattern of corruption felt like solving a puzzle piece. Martha's counter-strategy became apparent when she hired a crisis management firm from the city. Suddenly there were whispers around town about my vendetta against her, suggestions that my divorce had made me unstable, implications that I was manipulating vulnerable elderly residents for personal gain. But her reputation management campaign backfired spectacularly. The same community members she'd been harassing for years were now organizing against her. Her attempt to paint me as the villain fell flat when people remembered that she'd been the one calling police on legal houseboats and filing frivolous complaints about bird feeders. The final piece of our preparation involved media strategy. The local newspaper had been following the story since the first HOA meeting confrontation. When Patricia confirmed that criminal charges were imminent, we coordinated a comprehensive evidence release that would tell the complete story: harassment campaign, financial fraud, community impact, and ultimate accountability. Everything was ready. Martha had spent months escalating against my houseboat, never realizing that each aggressive move was building the case against her. Now it was time to see how she'd handle being the one under investigation. The community meeting where everything would come to a head was scheduled for the following week. Martha didn't know it yet, but her reign of terror was about to end very publicly. 2 days before our evidence was scheduled to go public, Martha made the kind of desperate move that turns misdemeanor corruption into federal obstruction of justice. I discovered it purely by accident when I stopped by the HOA office to pick up some old meeting minutes for our case file. The office door was propped open and I could hear someone frantically typing and clicking through computer files. Martha was hunched over the desktop computer, completely absorbed in whatever she was doing. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with her usually perfect perfume created an oddly human scent I'd never associated with her before. "Martha," I called out, "everything okay?" She jumped like I'd fired a gun, spinning around with the kind of wide-eyed panic you see in cornered animals. Her laptop was open beside the desktop computer, and I could see file transfer windows on both screens. "Jake, you startled me. I'm just cleaning up some old files, organizing things for the transition." Her voice had that brittle quality of someone lying badly under pressure. Here's the mini twist that sealed her fate. Martha thought she was deleting evidence, but my IT background meant I understood something she didn't. When you delete files from a computer, they don't actually disappear. They just get marked as available space until something else overwrites them. And HOA policy required automatic cloud backups of all financial records. She was essentially creating a perfect digital trail of obstruction of justice in real time. I played dumb, chatted for a few minutes about lake weather and community events, then casually mentioned that my software consulting business included data recovery services. It's amazing what you can recover from computers these days. Even when people think files are completely gone, there are usually traces somewhere. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. That afternoon, I called Patricia and Sarah with an update. Patricia's response was immediate. "We need to secure those computers now. Destroying evidence during an active investigation is a federal crime." By evening, FBI agents had seized the HOA office computers under a federal warrant. The forensic computer analysis revealed exactly what we'd suspected. Martha had attempted to delete 3 years of financial records, email communications, and contract documentation. But the cloud backups preserved everything, and the deletion attempt itself became additional evidence of criminal intent. Knowledge nugget: never try to delete digital evidence. Forensic recovery often makes the crime worse than the original offense. Martha's panic response escalated from there. She hired a private investigator to dig deeper into my personal life, looking for anything that could discredit me as a witness. The PI showed up at my ex-wife's house, my former workplace, even my daughter's college campus. But instead of finding dirt, he found character witnesses. My ex-wife called me laughing. "Jake, this guy spent an hour asking me about your financial irregularities and history of vindictive behavior. I told him you were so honest you once drove 20 minutes back to a store because they'd given you 50 cents too much change." My former boss had a similar conversation. They wanted to know if you'd ever shown signs of technical manipulation or system abuse. I explained that you were the guy who found and reported a billing error that was benefiting our company by thousands of dollars annually. Even my divorce attorney received a visit. "Most interesting call I've had in years," she told me. "Someone wanted to know if you'd tried to hide assets or manipulate financial records during your divorce." I explained that you'd been almost obsessively transparent about every penny. Martha's investigation campaign was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of finding evidence of my supposed instability, she was inadvertently creating a character reference list that would make any prosecutor jealous. But her desperation reached new heights when she started approaching community members directly, trying to convince them that I was manipulating them for personal gain. She showed up at Bob Peterson's house with a folder full of printed articles about HOA scams and financial manipulation schemes. Bob called me afterward, chuckling. "Son, she spent an hour trying to convince me that you were the real criminal here. Told me you were probably planning to steal HOA funds yourself and pin it on her. I asked her if she had any proof and she started crying." The community rallied around our investigation instead of being intimidated by her pressure campaign. Mrs. Martinez organized a Support Jake barbecue that turned into the biggest community gathering in years. The gravel parking lot crunched under dozens of cars as neighbors shared stories, compared documentation. Martha's final desperate move was attempting to call a special HOA meeting to address the vendetta being pursued by certain board members. She wanted to put my investigation to a community vote, apparently believing she could still manipulate public opinion. Instead, she'd given us the perfect venue for the public confrontation that would end this once and for all. Martha's special meeting to address my supposed vendetta was scheduled for a Thursday evening. What she didn't know was that Patricia Williams had coordinated with local media to make this the most public HOA meeting in county history. By 6 p.m., the community center parking lot looked like a news convention. 3 local TV stations, 2 newspapers, and a radio reporter had all shown up after receiving anonymous tips about major HOA corruption revelations. The crunching gravel under camera equipment and the buzz of reporters checking their audio levels created an atmosphere more like a press conference than a community meeting. Martha arrived fashionably late, probably expecting her usual audience of 30 neighbors in folding chairs. Instead, she walked into a room packed with over 150 people, including FBI agents, county prosecutors, and enough media to make CNN jealous. The look on her face was priceless, like someone who'd ordered a quiet dinner and been surprised with a surprise party featuring all their worst enemies. Her crisis management consultant expensive suit, nervous energy immediately started damage control. They'd prepared a presentation claiming that I had manipulated the community against Martha through false allegations and personal vendettas stemming from divorce financial stress. Here's the mini twist that ended her campaign permanently. While Martha's team was setting up their defense presentation, Channel 7's investigative reporter was live tweeting the forensic accountant's findings. Sarah had provided the media with a simplified version of our evidence package, complete with easy-to-understand charts showing exactly how much money had been stolen and where it went. By the time Martha stood up to address the room, half the audience was reading about her embezzlement schemes on their phones in real time. "Fellow Lake Serenity residents," Martha began, her voice shakier than I'd ever heard it, "we're here tonight because certain individuals have chosen to pursue personal vendettas rather than community harmony." A reporter in the back row raised her hand. "Mrs. Hendricks, can you comment on the FBI's investigation into $127,000, 0 cents in allegedly embezzled HOA funds?" Martha's consultant whispered urgently in her ear, but she was beyond listening to advice. "Those allegations are completely fabricated by someone who clearly has mental health issues stemming from his recent divorce." That's when Channel 4's investigative team played their ace card. They'd brought their own forensic accountant to review our evidence package. He stood up with a laptop and projector. "Mrs. Hendricks, we've independently verified the financial irregularities identified in the forensic audit. Could you explain why payments to your brother-in-law's company increased 400% during your tenure as HOA president?" The room went dead silent. Martha's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her consultant was frantically shuffling papers, looking for talking points that could address actual evidence rather than character assassination. But Martha was done listening to professional advice. 3 months of mounting pressure, failed cover-up attempts, and community backlash had finally broken her composure completely. "Fine, you want the truth? Jake Morrison has been harassing me since the day he moved that floating trailer park onto our lake. He's systematically destroyed everything I worked to build here." The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every news camera in the room was recording her meltdown live. "I took some money, yes, but it was for the community. Everything I did was to protect property values from people like him, who don't understand what this community is supposed to represent." Her consultant literally put his head in his hands. Patricia Williams was furiously taking notes. The FBI agents were exchanging glances that probably meant case closed. But Martha wasn't finished digging her own grave. You think this is about money? This is about standards. This is about keeping the wrong kind of people from ruining everything we've built. And there it was. The mask finally came off, completely. 3 months of pretending this was about community standards and property values, and she'd just admitted it was about keeping the wrong kind of people away from her vision of lakefront paradise. The community reaction was immediate and devastating. People started standing up and walking toward the exit, not in support of Martha. They were leaving because they couldn't stomach watching someone destroy themselves so publicly. Mrs. Martinez was the first to speak after Martha's confession. I've lived on this lake for 15 years. My family has always been welcome here, until you decided we were the wrong kind of people. You stole our money and our peace of mind. Bob Peterson struggled to his feet with his walker. Martha, I've been fishing this lake since before you were born. It's not your lake, it's not your community, and it sure as hell isn't your money. One sentence takeaway. Public accountability often prevents future corruption better than private settlements. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. By the time the meeting officially ended, Martha was sitting alone at the front table, while news crews packed up their equipment. Her consultant had disappeared. Roger was nowhere to be seen. Even her few remaining allies had quietly slipped out during her meltdown. The next morning, arrest warrants would be issued, but that night, Martha's reign of terror ended not with legal documents, but with a community finally seeing exactly who she really was. The county commissioner's monthly meeting 3 weeks later was supposed to be routine business, budget approvals, zoning requests, the usual small-town governance. Instead, it became the most attended public meeting in county history. Word had spread through social media and local news coverage that Martha's case would be presented publicly, with full evidence disclosure and community impact statements. By 6 p.m., the community center was packed beyond fire code capacity. Over 300 people crowded into a space designed for 150, with overflow crowds watching via live stream on phones and tablets. The local fire marshal had to set up speakers outside for people who couldn't get seats. I sat in the front row with my evidence presentation loaded on a laptop, 3 years of documentation organized into a timeline that even a child could follow. Behind me, Sarah had prepared visual aids showing exactly how the money had been stolen and where it went. Patricia Williams sat with a thick folder of criminal charges ready to be filed immediately after the public presentation. Martha arrived with her defense attorney, a different one since her crisis management team had dropped her after the public meltdown. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. The perfectly coiffed hair was showing gray roots. The manicured nails were bitten down, and her usually immaculate outfit looked like it had been slept in. County Commissioner Janet Davis called the meeting to order and explained the unusual circumstances. Due to the significant community impact and ongoing criminal investigation, we're providing a public forum for evidence presentation in the Lake Serenity HOA corruption case. Martha's attorney spoke first, attempting damage control. My client acknowledges certain financial irregularities, but maintains that any discrepancies were the result of poor bookkeeping rather than criminal intent. Then Patricia Williams stood up. Commissioner Davis, the state has prepared criminal charges, including embezzlement, mail fraud, obstruction of justice, and racketeering, in connection with a multi-HOA fraud operation spanning 5 years and 7 communities. The murmur that went through the crowd was like a wave building before it crashes on shore. But the real moment of truth came when Commissioner Davis invited community impact statements. One after another, Martha's victims stood up to tell their stories publicly. Mrs. Martinez described years of harassment over her family's 2 colorful celebrations. Bob Peterson talked about being intimidated for fishing the lake he'd loved for 40 years. Linda Morrison shared documentation of selective enforcement that would have made a civil rights lawyer weep. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium with 3 years of evidence distilled into a 15-minute presentation that told the complete story. But instead of starting with technical details or financial charts, I started with something simpler. This all began when I built a houseboat to live on while renovating my grandfather's cabin. It was completely legal, fully inspected, and harmed no one. But it didn't fit Martha Hendrick's vision of what our community should look like. so she called the police. I clicked to the first slide, a photo of Martha pointing accusingly at my boat while police officers looked confused. What she didn't know was that her harassment campaign would expose the largest HOA corruption case in county history. Every time she escalated against my legal houseboat, she created more evidence of her own crimes.